The ocean was calm that morning. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes a man believe the journey ahead will be easy. The kind that convinces him that whatever lies ahead can be handled the same way everything else has been handled before. The longships moved steadily across the water, their wooden frames cutting through the waves with a quiet rhythm that felt almost reassuring. At the front of the lead ship stood Leif Haraldsson, tall, still, watching. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, not searching, but expecting, as if he already knew that whatever they were moving toward would not be simple. Behind him, the men laughed. They always laughed at the beginning, because at the beginning, everything feels possible, and possibility has a way of making even the hardest journey feel lighter than it actually is. One of them leaned forward, gripping his oar with confidence, saying that land would be theirs before the next full moon, that they would build new homes and new lives far from the place that had slowly stopped giving them what they needed to survive. Others nodded, agreeing without hesitation, because agreement is easy when hope is still fresh. But Leif didn't respond. He had heard those words before, in different places, at different times, spoken by different men who all believed the same thing. Hope had a way of repeating itself, sounding convincing no matter how many times it had been proven wrong. They weren't sailing for glory, and they weren't chasing conquest. This was not about expanding power or proving strength. They were sailing because they had no other choice. The winters had grown harsher, the land less forgiving, and the balance they had relied on for years had started to shift in ways they could no longer control. And when that happens, when staying becomes more dangerous than leaving, people move. It's not bravery, it's necessity. But even within that necessity, there was something about this journey that felt different. Not in a way that could be explained, not in something visible or obvious, but in something quieter. Something that settled into the spaces between the sounds of the sea, into the moments when the laughter faded and the only thing left was the steady movement of water against wood. It was there, in that silence, that the feeling began to take shape. Not fear, not doubt, but something closer to awareness. The kind that doesn't arrive all at once, but builds slowly, almost unnoticed, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. And as the ships continued forward, cutting deeper into open water, that feeling stayed with him, steady and persistent, as if it had already seen what was waiting ahead, even if he hadn't yet. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Days passed, then weeks, and the journey stopped feeling temporary and started to feel like something they had always been part of. The sea tested them with shifting winds, long storms, and the slow weight of hunger. But they endured, not because it was easy, but because turning back was no longer an option. Men like Leif Haraldsson didn't move forward because they were certain. They moved forward because there was nothing left behind worth returning to. Then one morning, the fog began to lift. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a break in the gray. Then shapes appeared, then color, and finally land. There, someone shouted. The entire ship came alive. Men stood, stepping forward, eyes locked on the horizon. Voices rose as relief spread through them. They had found it. An island. Untouched. Wild. Beautiful. Leif stepped forward, gripping the edge of the ship as the land came into focus. Green hills stretched upward, forests thick and undisturbed, fresh water cutting through open ground. It was everything they had hoped for. It was perfect. Too perfect. By midday, they reached the shore. Boots pressed into the sand, and for a moment, no one spoke. They simply stood there, taking it in, letting the reality settle. This was it. A place to begin again. We build here.
This land is rich and full of promise.
Others
it is
agreed
ideal
immediately.
for our settlement.
Why wouldn't they? Everything they needed was
place.
right in front of them. But Leif didn't share their certainty. He looked around slowly, studying the trees, then the ground, then the space between both. Nothing was wrong. And yet, something felt off in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't enough to speak on. Not yet. The first sign came quietly, so quietly that no one noticed it. Not because it was hidden, but because no one was looking for it. After everything they had endured at sea, their focus had shifted toward relief, not caution. But Leif Haraldsson saw it. Near the edge of the forest, where the sand gave way to darker soil, he stopped and crouched down. A footprint, not theirs. The shape was clear, pressed deep into the ground, untouched by time. It was fresh, too fresh for a place they believed no one had been. When he pointed it out, one of the men barely looked before dismissing it. Animals, he said, with a certainty that came more from convenience than observation. It was easier to believe that than to question what they had already accepted. Leif responded quietly, not arguing, but not agreeing either. Maybe, but his tone carried doubt, the kind that doesn't disappear just because others refuse to acknowledge it. That night, the camp came alive again. A fire was lit, food was shared, and laughter returned as if the journey had already ended. Plans were made, voices were confident, and the idea of a new beginning settled quickly among them. But Leif sat apart, close enough to hear, yet distant enough to think. He watched the movement, listened to the voices, but his attention stayed elsewhere, fixed on something he couldn't fully explain yet. Then came the second sign. Smoke. Faint, rising in the distance, steady enough to stand apart from the mist. Leif noticed it immediately, his gaze holding longer than necessary before he spoke. This land isn't empty. Some followed his eyes, just long enough to consider it, but the thought didn't stay. They had come too far to turn back, one of them replied, and if someone was there, they would deal with it. Confidence filled the space again, but confidence has a way of ignoring what it doesn't want to face. And in that moment, the truth was already there, waiting, even if no one was ready to accept it. It happened at dawn, in the kind of silence that feels harmless until it breaks. There was no warning, no signal, nothing to suggest that anything had changed. And then, without explanation, it did. The first man fell before he even understood what was happening. Then another. Then another. What had felt calm only moments before shifted into something unrecognizable. As confusion replaced certainty and the stillness of the camp gave way to movement that no one had prepared for. Shouts echoed across the camp as men reached for their weapons, trying to respond to something they couldn't yet fully see. But the enemy was already moving, fast, controlled, and deliberate in a way that made it clear this was not an accident. This wasn't a scattered encounter or a sudden clash. It carried structure. It carried intention. They knew we were here, someone shouted, and the words didn't sound like a realization as much as they sounded like confirmation of something that had already been building beneath the surface. Leif Haraldsson turned, scanning the movement around him, not reacting with panic, but with focus. He watched how it unfolded, how the strikes came from different directions, how every response from his men seemed to meet something that had already been anticipated. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. It was planned. Every step, every movement, every moment of confusion. They had all been accounted for before the first man even fell. The enemy closed in from multiple sides, cutting through the camp with a level of coordination that felt rehearsed. Lines broke almost immediately. Orders were lost before they could even be fully given. What had once been structure dissolved into scattered reactions, and panic began to spread in the spaces where control used to exist. And in the middle of it all, as the noise rose and the balance shifted, Leif understood something that had been there from the beginning, something that had revealed itself in small ways he had not fully acted on. They had never been alone. The battle didn't end quickly. It stretched, dragging beyond what any of them had expected, until it became something heavier than violence. It stopped being about winning and turned into something else entirely. Survival. The kind that strips everything down to the simplest truth, that nothing matters except the next breath, the next step,
They're coming
the
from
next
the trees!
moment. Men who had
Hold
laughed
the line,
together
protect
days
the camp!
before were no longer
They are
thinking about the
coordinated.
future.
This is
They
a
were
trap.
fighting to stay in the present, holding on to something that was slipping faster than they could control. Leif Haraldsson moved through it all with focus, not driven by panic, but by a controlled awareness of everything happening around him. He watched how his men responded, how their movements became less coordinated, how the structure they had relied on began to fall apart under pressure. And even as he adjusted, even as he tried to hold what remained together, he could see it clearly. They were losing ground. Not all at once, not in a way that could be pointed to as a single moment, but gradually, with every exchange that didn't go as expected. These aren't scattered tribes, he said to one of the men closest to him, his voice steady despite the shift happening around them. They're organized. The words weren't spoken as a theory. They were a recognition of something that had already proven itself. This wasn't a group reacting to an unexpected arrival. This was a group that had prepared for it. They were waiting. And that realization changed everything, because it meant the disadvantage they were facing hadn't started when the attack began. It had been there long before. Every move the enemy made carried a sense of anticipation, as if they already understood what Leif's men would do before they did it. It wasn't just speed or strength. It was timing, positioning, awareness, the kind that doesn't come from chance, but from knowledge. And in that moment, as the pattern became impossible to ignore, the thought settled in fully. This wasn't just war. It was knowledge. And the difference between the two was something they were already paying for. By the time the fighting slowed, the island no longer felt like hope. What had once looked like a place to begin again now carried a different meaning, one that settled heavily over everything they had believed when they first stepped onto the shore. It felt like loss, not just of strength or position, but of something deeper, something that couldn't be recovered simply by continuing forward. The ground was quiet again, but not in the same way it had been before. This quiet held weight. It stayed. It pressed into the space around them in a way that made it impossible to ignore what had happened. Leif Haraldsson stood among what remained of his people, and the difference was clear without needing to be spoken. There were fewer of them now. The confidence that had carried them across the sea had been replaced with something else, something heavier, something that didn't allow for easy certainty. They looked the same, but they weren't the same. What they had experienced had shifted something that couldn't be undone, and Leif could see it in the way they stood, in the way they looked at the land that had once seemed so certain. They had come looking for a future. That was the reason for everything. Every mile of ocean they had crossed, every risk they had taken, every decision that had led them here. And yet, what they found was not what they had expected. It was something else entirely. Not opportunity, not relief, but truth. The kind that doesn't arrive in words, but in understanding, in the quiet realization that something has been misunderstood from the very beginning. This was never ours, one of the men said quietly, the words carrying no resistance, no argument, just acceptance. Leif didn't respond, not because he disagreed, but because what he understood went further than that. It wasn't just that the land wasn't theirs. It was that they had stepped into something they didn't fully recognize, something that had already been shaped long before they arrived. And that realization, more than anything else, was what remained. Something had been waiting here, not for them specifically, but for anyone who believed they could arrive without consequence. And now, standing in the silence that followed everything they had lost, that truth was no longer something they could overlook. That night, there was no celebration. No laughter carried through the air. No voices speaking about what would come next. No sense of relief after everything they had endured. Only silence remained. The kind that doesn't pass quickly, the kind that stays and forces every man to sit with what has already happened. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to question because the answer has already revealed itself. Leif Haraldsson stood at the edge of the shore, looking out at the same ocean they had crossed with hope still intact. It had carried them forward when turning back was no longer an option. It had held their belief that somewhere beyond what they knew, something better was waiting. And now, standing there, he understood that while it had brought them here, it would not take back what had already been lost. The journey had done what it was always going to do. It had shown them something they could not have seen any other way. Some journeys don't lead to new beginnings. They don't offer the second chance that men convince themselves must exist somewhere beyond the horizon. Instead, they lead to realizations. Quiet, unavoidable realizations that change the way a man understands everything that came before. And sometimes, those realizations don't come with reward or relief. Sometimes, they come with a cost that cannot be undone, no matter how far a man is willing to go to escape it. And sometimes, the cost of that realization is everything. Before you go, let us know in the comments what you would have done if you were in Leif Haraldsson's position, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories.